Hey guys, it's Nicole. I'm back with another video, and today's video is going to be about a book I actually read a year or two ago. I picked it up in a used bookstore. Long story short, mostly just love the cover and the title and the blurb. But before we get into that, I wanted to say if you have subscribed to my channel at any point during the history of my channel, thank you so much. Every one of you that's still here, that subscribed, it's all of you mean so much to me, and I cannot state my appreciation enough. If you haven't subscribed and you're here, go ahead and click that subscribe button. It costs absolutely nothing, and you'll get notified when I upload new videos, which you never know if that'll change even though I have a schedule, so you might as well be subscribed. If you end up enjoying this video, please like, comment, and share. I always want to hear your thoughts. I always want you to share this video. Please share my stuff. So, the book we're going to be talking about today is an older book, for sure. It was published, I believe, in the 1980s, and it was at a used bookstore that I picked this up definitely a couple years ago. I just loved the title, and that's what led me to pick it up. So, the title is what sold me, and then the blurb really sold me. So, the book we're talking about today is called Human Voices by Penelope Fitzgerald. This is an older book. Like I said, 1980s or so was around the time. It actually says 1980 exactly. So honestly, when I picked this up, Human Voices, the title, is what really drew me in. I was very curious as to what that could mean, human voices. So that is what originally got my attention. The cover itself is something interesting. It's a very simple cover, pretty minimalistic, with the cover being this very dark, almost rainy sky gray blue. And the only images that are kind of on the cover are a big, very older microphone, like for recording stuff, and the silhouettes of people walking behind it. And that's it. Those are all the images on the cover. So the cover kind of gave me a little bit, right? Because human voices, microphone, and then humans behind it. But that's all it gave me. I had no idea what this book could be about. So that's when the blurb came in and sold me. So after picking it up and reading the blurb, this is what we get. There is a review quote on the back, on the top here, that I do want to read that is interesting. So the review quote at the very top of the back says, "A tribute to the unsung and quintessentially English heroism of imperfect people." And that quote is by New Criterion. So, getting into the blurb, it says, "When British listeners tuned in to the BBC's 9 o'clock news in the middle of 1940, they had no idea what human dramas and follies were unfolding behind the scenes. Targeted by enemy bombers, the BBC had turned its concert hall into a dormitory for both sexes, and personal chaos rivaled the political. Amid the bombs and broadcasts, two program directors fight for power while their younger female assistants fall prey to affairs, abandonment, and unrequited love. Reading this intimate glimpse behind the scenes of the BBC in its heyday, one is left with the sensation," William Boyd wrote in London Magazine, "that this is what it was really like." And that's the blurb. So that's what this book is about. And I'm not British. Should be pretty obvious by the way I speak. So it only interested me because I'm always interested in people. And even though this is not necessarily like written word for word exactly what happened during 1940 in England during, like, in the BBC, it's a as accurate representation as you can get from someone who was actually there. There are a couple of more review quotes on the back, as well as a little bit of a blurb about the author. I'm not going to read it because it just kind of goes on to describe what other books she has written, but if you're interested, you can go look her up. The other thing I wanted to point out about this book is that on the cover there actually is a review quote at the very, very top, and this is probably what also sold me when I first picked it up and was checking it out, as well as the blurb, of course. So the review quote at the top of the cover says, "A wonderful combination of deadpan English comedy and surreal farce." And that quote is by A.S. Byatt, I think is how you say the name, Byatt. And I was sold. I love so much deadpan English comedy. It's such good sense of humor, and so I was already sold with that. That's what made me want to read this, and I think you might want to read it too if you're into any kind of history like I am, at least. The great thing about this book is it also comes with an introduction. It says down here, introduction by Mark, I'm hoping I'm not going to butcher this last name, Demazer. Sorry, I hope I don't mispronounce that name, but that's who does the introduction of this book. And the really, really great thing about this introduction is it's kind of descriptive of like, so she, the author, Penelope Fitzgerald, worked at the BBC, which at the time was actually not called the BBC. It was actually called Broadcasting House, and then would be abbreviated BH. I don't remember if it ever says what year it became the British Broadcasting Channel, but it used to be called Broadcasting House. I didn't know that. It's been around forever. It just had a different name before. So I had no idea. But she actually used to work there, pretty much like really low level, like not up and around like with all the people that the book kind of describes. But she was there. She had a little bit of the essence of the energy and a little bit of knowing what was going on at the time. There are a couple of sentences from this introduction that I do want to read that to me describe why I actually really loved this book so much. So the first one I wanted to read was, it's on the first page of the introduction. If Fitzgerald's contribution to the BBC's war effort was marginal, she at least had a ringside seat, while its mandarins, then as now laden with acronyms, established its reputation as an independent, if imperfect, force for the good by telling the truth, or at least large chunks of it. And that was pretty much what you get when you read the book. You're reading about these characters, these people that worked at the BBC. I'm going to call it the BBC because otherwise it might get confusing. During 1940, and how imperfect they were, but how determined they were to do their jobs, especially during a time full of turmoil. 1940 London. What was going on around that time? The other part that I wanted to point out here that I absolutely love reading is why I enjoyed it so much was the two main characters in this book are two producers at the BBC, and they both produce different kinds of things. Like they're both responsible for two different kinds of broadcasting things. So the two characters that I'm talking about are Sam and Jeff. Sam Brooks and Jeff Haggard. Sam Brooks, he's the head of recorded programs, so things that would be recorded ahead of time. But then Jeff Haggard was the director of program planning, and so that would be live things that would happen live. And the way that they get so frustrated with each other when one affects the other, especially live stuff, because live stuff could interrupt pre-programmed things if it was emergency necessary for whatever reason, and that would just completely frustrate the one who did the recorded programs, Sam Brooks. And Jeff Haggard's like, this is just the job, you just gotta roll with it, you just gotta deal with it. The other thing that is pointed out here is that they both share a profound sense of duty. And you know, during this time, war was ravaging, especially parts of Northern Europe, and as it mentioned on the back, targeted by enemy bombers, especially places like this that were broadcasting things. It was a time of incredible stress and bravery to continue broadcasting everything that you were, especially if it was deemed necessary to evacuate. You know, there were threats, and it was like, hey, it's time, like you guys need to go, and they were determined to stay and do their jobs by broadcasting so that people could tune into the radio and hear what they needed to hear, or even if it wasn't emergency necessary information, it was still something that the people could count on, still people that the people of England could count on. And it was really cool. So Human Voices is, to me, such a great title for this book because it is the human voices that are broadcasted on the radio from the BBC, but it's also the human voices behind the network that even if they don't speak any audible words from their own mouths, they are still using their voice, their power to continue to do something, use their bravery, their determination, and to continue broadcasting even in the face of imminent danger and possible death. So it, to me, is what human voices means, and that's why I really, really like this book. If you're any kind of history buff, regardless of where that that history is, whatever country or era, this is just such a great snapshot of people during a time of crisis deciding that what they can do with their voices or just what they have control over is more important to them than evacuating for their safety. And don't get me wrong, it doesn't mean that people who evacuated are cowards. That's not true. It's just that these are stories that inspire hope in times of incredible distress and hardship. And it's so important to have stories like that. And it just inspires such hope. It really does, you know? You read the story, you know, and there's a lot of different characters. Like, yes, the book itself centers around the two producers that get on each other's nerves sometimes, but are there to do their duty. But there are several characters in the book, and they all have different roles in the company, like at the broadcasting house, that are important in their own right, but how do they navigate fulfilling those roles in this time when they have personal things happening at the same time, especially during a time such as war? And it's a great snapshot of it, you know, because you don't really have like a narrator in this story. It's just, here's conversations between these characters at this time, and then here's conversations between these three characters here, or maybe these two characters here. And there's not really like a narrator as a character per se. It's more like an omniscient narrator per se. And so you get glimpses of all the characters that are important to the story through this omniscient narrator. We just hear their conversations, we get a little bit of context of what they're doing in the scene, and then that's it. There's no like intense thoughts. Like sometimes you get a description of what a character might be thinking based on the look on their face, but a lot of the time it's more outside looking in a window than we're participating in the scene, which does make it more of a snapshot of a moment in time. And it was a really, really great way to write that. I actually don't know much about this author, but I have read 2 of her books because I actually got 2 of her books from the used bookstore. The other one I might make a video about. The other one was really interesting. It was just something that I don't usually read, so it was very out of my comfort zone, but I might talk about it. But I do love the way she wrote this book. And before I get into anything else, I don't know if I have any thoughts that might have any spoilers in it, but I do want to go ahead and read the first page of the book just to give a taste. So like I said, it was originally published in 1980. I think it actually says right here that the introduction wasn't added until 2014. So the great thing about the introduction is it does kind of give you that insight, a little bit of extra analysis. So each of the chapters doesn't even have the word chapter. It just has the number 1 or 2 or whichever chapter at the top. And then Just gonna read the first page, and this is the first. It actually, one of the sentence ends on this page, so I don't have to even turn the next page to finish the sentence. So chapter 1, inside Broadcasting House, the Department of Recorded Programs was sometimes called the Seraglio because its director found that he could work better when surrounded by young women. This in itself was an understandable habit and quite harmless, or to be more accurate, RPD never considered whether it was harmless or not. If he was to think about such things, his attention had to be specifically drawn to them. Meanwhile, it was understood by the girls that he might have an overwhelming need to confide his troubles in one of them, or perhaps all of them, but never in 2 of them at once, during the 3 wartime shifts in every 24 hours. This, too, might possibly suggest the arrangements of a seraglio, but it would have been quite unfair to deduce, as some of the old servants of the corporation occasionally did, that the RP Junior temporary assistants had no other duties. On the contrary, they were in anxious charge of the 5,000 recordings in use every week. Those which the department processed went into the sound archives of the war, while the scrap was silent forever. The great thing about this first page is it is exactly as described as important jobs being done by imperfect people. I mean, listen to what he says. He's like, and it's not even like what he says. It's kind of like we're mostly listening to, like I said, the omniscient narrator, and then it's kind of acknowledged that he's like, or it's kind of acknowledged that he's never really thought about if it's a harmless thing to hire young women to confide his troubles in. So, an imperfect person running an incredibly important department and part of the broadcasting house. And those 2 things kind of hang there, you know? They don't cancel each other out, you know? The fact that he is a little imperfect and kind of taking advantage of young, beautiful women is not cool. But it also doesn't cancel out the fact that he's doing a job that a lot of people won't, because of how dangerous it is to stay in the city and work there. So that's really what I think this book is intended to point out. 2 things can be true at the same time. Imperfect people can have their flaws and do things that we don't really consider okay. And at the same time, because that's still here, and at the same time, they can be doing something incredibly important that is necessary, that is needed, that is important, and takes a lot of bravery. And those 2 things can be true at the exact same time without either one negating the other. And I think that's especially important to think about nowadays, you know? I'm not saying we need to forgive or gloss over people who commit crimes or do horrible things to people. What I will say, though, is that there has been the movement of the last 10 years or so of canceling people in the public eye for what at first seemed like egregious crimes against humanity, which, agreed, until it became canceling any single person that announces an opinion that some people don't like. And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to condone people saying racist remarks and people should just still give them their attention and money. That's not what I mean. What I mean is there is no wiggle room in our cancel culture for holding 2 things at once, for saying this person is a person who did this thing or this thing or this thing, and they also did this thing, and we don't like this thing. And I think it's possible to hold those 2 things at the same exact time without letting them negate the other. They're both still there. They're both still important, and we shouldn't gloss over either of them. And I think my point in all of this is it's important to acknowledge and always hold people accountable, but it's also important to acknowledge and even uplift the qualities of people that you still want to see. And those two qualities can be in the same person, because that's how humans are. Humans are not this, they are this perfectly good person. All of the people that I think about that I love their activism, the way they speak out politically, like they love this. When I think about that, I think, I bet you there is at least one quality in at least all of those people that I do not like. And if I knew them in person, I would not like that, and it would piss me off. But at the same time, doesn't it matter that people have good attributes as well? Because we're people. We're not these fixed individuals where it's like, oh, that's their one attribute that I don't like. That is their whole person, and we don't get to discuss it at all. There's no chance for change. There's no chance for anything, really. And I feel like this book kind of highlights that you can hold both of those things at the same time. And I think that's a really important message, especially today. So I don't really think I have any thoughts of spoilers for this book. Like I said, it's just a snapshot. We don't go too deep into anyone's lives. There's several characters, men and women, and that do all different kinds of jobs in the BBC. And a lot of them, pretty much all of them, are risky, because just being in London at that time, 1940, was risky. And yeah, I don't really have any spoiler-related thoughts. Just an overall sense of this is what I took from the book. So if that at all sounded interesting to you, I think you should go check it out. I picked this book up by chance, and I am so happy I read it. This was written 40 years ago? More than 40 years ago. Time is a construct. More than 40 years ago. And it has a message that is very relevant today. So I think it is a very, very good book to read, even without that message. Even if you're just going to gloss over that part and not think about the message that I took from it. It is a really cool story of people working in a radio broadcasting house that were determined to continue doing their job under the threat of war and wartime casualties. And that's a pretty cool story. So I do recommend this book. I honestly don't really have any complaints. It's a really short read. You can just pick it up and read it in like a day, honestly. So I really don't have any complaints, honestly. It's really, really good. I don't know if it's a favorite book of mine, because there's just so many other books that I love so much more. But I do really think it's a great book to read. So that's all for this week's video. Thank you guys so much for being here. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.